Okay, part 2, chapter 11, The Deadly Left. We're talking about who were the assassins in American history. Um, so, I'm going to go down a list here, and you're going to find an interesting pattern that, at least regarding actual assassins, there is a majority of party affiliation that one can ascribe to these assassins. Now, again, you'll get a lot of argument from the left about this stuff, where they don't actually prove that the person's a right winger. They just try to disprove he's a left winger or something by mudding up information or ignoring it altogether. Nice try. So Abe Lincoln was assassinated, as everyone knows, by John Wilkes Booth. Who was John Wilkes Booth? Oh, he was just an actor. Oh, and he wasn't a Democrat because he belonged to the Nobody Party or whatever the hell the thing was called. No, okay. First of all, that was the nickname of the party he belonged to. It wasn't a Democrat party either. But John Wilkes Booth was a Confederate spy from the South. He was a Democrat, Southern Democrat sympathizer, and everything he said and everything he did promoted or seemed to sympathize with what would have been a Democrat, Southern Democrat belief. Every action he took, like a spy or a secret agent for the Confederacy, was pro-slavery, anti-North, anti-Lincoln, anti-Republican, whatever. He may not have been a Democrat because he didn't belong to the Democrat Party, but that doesn't mean he wasn't left-leaning or anti-Republican or anti-North or wasn't pro-slavery. He was. So again, nice try. The next one on the list, James Garfield, 20 years later. He was assassinated by a man named Charles Guiteau. I think that's how it would have been pronounced. Now, obviously, he was mentally unstable, as, again, all these people are mentally unstable at one level or another. Him, apparently, more than many others, but he was also thought to have been a Republican. Well, again, at one time, maybe, but he changed his party affiliation to Democrat. Not from Democrat to Democrat before he killed the president. So, what does that make him? A Republican? No, makes him a Democrat. William McKinley, the next notable person assassinated, again the president, again 20 years later, was assassinated by a man named Leon Czolgosz. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right because that's hard to even spell, let alone say. This guy was a Marxist. He killed because of the inequality of the rich versus the poor and a bunch of other stuff. Anybody who tries to associate him with Republicans or Republicanism is not reading the tea leaves right here, is not seeing what they saw back then, is not understanding history. Huey Long, and I'm going to break from the presidents and talk about a fairly famous or infamous senator from Louisiana who was a huge Dixiecrat, one of the first Dixiecrats perhaps you might call him, and just not a nice guy. He was killed by a guy named Carl Weiss. I think he was a doctor. Registered Democrat, or at least Democrat leaning, whatever. Again, they tried to say he wasn't affiliated or he was a Democrat. JFK, Lee Harvey Oswald, of course. They've tried to muddle this up and say, oh, it was the mafia and it was this and that. The more time goes on, the more DNA proves, the more computer modeling shows it was a single killer shooting 2 bullets that did the damage. End of discussion. One guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. Sorry, conspiracy theorists. That's just the way it is. And why are they trying to muddy the waters? Because everyone knows that Lee Harvey Oswald was a defector to the USSR. He was a card-carrying commie. And he attempted to kill other people before JFK as well. He tried to kill a member of the John Birch Society. Now look, John Birch Society is about as radical right wing as you can get. So that doesn't make this guy a left winger. Or it doesn't make him a right winger, it makes him a left winger. He may not have been a Democrat because he was a communist. He might have belonged to a communist party. That doesn't mean he's not left wing. Unless you're going to try to convince me communism isn't a right wing ideology, isn't a left wing ideology all of a sudden, for purposes of this one and only discussion. RFK, the brother, who was campaigning to be president, was shot and killed by a man named Sirhan Sirhan. And Sirhan, again, they try to say, oh, he has no political affiliation. He was, a naturalized American. Okay, let's say what he was instead of what he isn't. What he was an American-hating, Jew-hating Palestinian by way of Jordan. He was a Marxist in his words and deeds. That makes him a left-winger. Don't care if he's not a Democrat. Makes him a left-winger. This doesn't say the deadly Democrats. It says the deadly left. Then you had Martin Luther King. Now, whether you agree or believe that he was a registered Republican, we'll never know because no one's saying. Not anyone. No, not. Some people are saying, but whatever. Everything he did, times he lived in, wouldn't have made him a Democrat by any stretch. He was possibly killed by James Earl Ray. There's new evidence. Well, not that new. It's now 15 years old. But there's evidence that might have proved that it was somebody else, or at least not James Earl Ray. But if it was James Earl Ray, and there's some evidence that proves it was, recent evidence, he was a Democrat. Let's go away from national politics and talk about municipalities here. Some of the more famous people assassinated in San Francisco a number of decades ago. Friends of Dianne Feinstein was Harvey Milk. I think he was a councilman or supervisor or something. And his buddy George Moscone, who was the mayor of San Francisco. They were both assassinated by a man named Dan White. Card-carrying Democrat, registered Democrat, all the way Democrat. Just didn't like the morals, if you will, of the gay Harvey Milk and other things that he was bringing into the thing. Look, even Democrats, as we said, can be completely intolerant, even of their own stuff. I love it when they eat their own, but this is a case going back a ways when you might have had a Democrat that just didn't believe in homosexuality or something. I'm not really sure exactly what his motive was, but it had something to do with not liking the direction Milk and Moscone were taking the city. Killed him. Medgar Evers, by all accounts, a decent human being who was running the local chapter of the NCAAP in his hometown, and family man, whatever, killed by a guy named Byron De La Beckwith, or nicknamed DeLay. He was apparently a member of the KKK and or some other anti-black or whatever deal. And of course, by that account alone, liberals like to say that he must have been a Republican. Here's the problem with that, especially considering this was way back in 1963. And that is, as we mentioned in the video about the history of the two parties, the KKK was owned lock, stock, and barrel by Democrats. It was created by Democrats. It was populated by Democrats. It was an anti-black, anti-civil rights juggernaut in the late 50s and early 60s, fighting desperately and hopelessly against the civil rights movements. which was being mostly promoted by Republicans. So anybody telling me that a member of the KKK, which also included a Democrat known as Robert Byrd, as we mentioned before, who was a Grand Kleagle and then became a representative, later a senator, friend of Hillary, blah, blah, blah. No one's going to convince me that a member of the KKK in 1963 who shot a black man because he was becoming too prominent or uppity, if you will, was a Republican. It doesn't fit history. It doesn't fit the facts. It doesn't fit anything. And further, 4 years later, Beckwith ran for office as, guess what? A Democrat. Next we have Malcolm X. Malcolm X was killed by 3 members of the Nation of Islam, which had recently boosted Malcolm X out of the Nation of Islam. It's liberals eating their own, basically what that is. And just to throw in a celebrity, I don't consider this an assassination because John Lennon wasn't ahead of anything. But they like to say John Lennon was assassinated because he was so famous or popular or whatever. He was killed by a guy named Mark David Chapman. Nutcase. No real political affiliation. So there's nothing there. They like to say right-wingers got him. There's some conspiracy about Reagan or the Republican, whatever. No, there's nothing there. There's no there. They tried that because, again, as Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. They gave it a shot. So let's total that up. Nut jobs 2, religious fanatics 1, Republicans 0, Democrats 7. I think that's how or 8, sorry. That's pretty much a pattern with regard to assassins. Now, I didn't name all the assassins, but if you want to go and name or find a bunch more assassins, if you can, you'll find something similar, I would imagine. I didn't cherry pick anything here. It's just the most notable assassins. And by 8-0, or if you want to say out of 12 assassins, there were 8 Democrats and the rest were other. It still proves my point. Next point would be about serial killers. Now, serial killers, which are killers who kill over time, as opposed to mass murderers who kill all at once, it's a mixed bag, I will admit. There's a lot of case where, okay, we're gonna have to figure out a way to keep the whiteboard from falling over. There's a case to be made that there are nearly as many Republicans or right-wingers who are serial killers as Democrats. But my contention is that most of them are actually, their affiliation is not known. Serial killers are probably the most mentally disturbed of all, because their mental illness is carried over year after year after year. It's not like they just snap and go crazy one time and then, oh, what did I do? It's not that they have a premeditated political agenda. They're killing people, sometimes randomly, sometimes because of some mental repression or sexual thing or what have you, over time. So they're usually the most nutty. Those people tend to have the weirdest ideas of politics, if they have any at all. Most of them have none at all. They are completely apolitical. David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, who killed during 1976-77. Couldn't find a thing about his politics. People try to associate certain things, but really, in the end of the day, his writings were nutty. He didn't say anything political at all. He's raised by Jewish parents in New York, which, you know, if you think of anything, that would have meant that he was probably a left-winger, but you just cannot tell. So there's no there. Kenneth Bianchi and his cousin Angelo Buono which were known as the Hillside Stranglers, or Hillside Strangler when they thought it was just one guy. Killed 13 people between 1977 and 1979. Again, there's really no political affiliation here. Ted Bundy killed 35 plus women from 1974 to 1978. Now, this one's a little weird. Apparently, he was a registered Republican. Apparently, he had actually worked for Republicans. But everything else that he did, everything he said, everything that he talked about after he was captured, sounded like a left winger. So maybe he was a mixed bag. Back then politics was starting to shift a little bit, and the old Democrats are becoming the modern Democrats, and lots of other things were happening. So if you want to give on the scorecard, put a 1 next to Republican on Ted Bundy, okay. My theory can hold that. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Monster, cannibal nut job who killed 15 people, men usually, I think exclusively, from 1978 through 1991, a very extended time for a serial killer. Again, nothing. No political. It was apolitical as they get. Couldn't find a thing about it. Albert DeSalvo, known as the Boston Strangler, killed 13 women from 1962 to 1964. He was a registered Democrat, probably not very politically motivated. He was thought to not actually be the Boston Strangler until recent evidence, DNA evidence, might have proved otherwise, that they really did have their man. He wasn't just a rapist, which is all he was ever convicted for, not a murderer. But now, too late, of course he's dead, but now they might have said, yeah, he might have been the Boston Strangler after all. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, killed 33 people, stuffed them under his house. True nut job from 1972 to 1978. Democrat. He was actually a chairman of a local Democrat group or something, and this has a famous picture shaking Rosalind Carter's hand. H.H. Holmes, one of the first serial killers in America, killed 8 plus people in 1891 to 1994, mostly during the time of the World's Fair of Chicago. A number of books have been written about that. Again, no political affiliation to speak of. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, killed 14 people from 1985 to 84 to 1985. Again, no political affiliation. When even he asked on a questionnaire when he was incarcerated, what is your political affiliation? He said, Democrats and Republicans, they're all politicians are shit. He didn't like anybody, so nothing there. Charles Manson, the Manson family, left-wing nut job if ever there was one. Don't be fooled by the tattoo of a swastika on his head. Remember, fascism is left-wing. Everything he said, everything he did, everything he taught, everything he wrote, songwriter, by the way, all left-wing Marxist nutjob stuff. And that's also what the tattoo is talking about. It's a socialist fascist. They do exist together. Rodney Alcala, personal favorite of mine, because I have a personal history connection to this person. The dating game killer. Killed at least 7 women, but could have killed more in both California, Colorado, and New York. And there are some people who have yet to prove it, but are saying that he may have killed as many as 130 women. From 1971 to 1979, again, cannot determine any political affiliation with this guy. And for those who are just going, what? You're connected to a serial killer? Let me clear that up real quick. My stepmother was the woman who picked him during the dating game. And she wasn't my stepmother yet, but she would be a year later. And she refused to go out with him because he was creepy. Of course, if you knew my stepmother, you'd find her to be just as creepy. Whole nother story. It is said that the two women that were killed just after the dating game rejection by my stepmother might have led to him killing those women. And lastly, but by no means a complete list here, again, these are just random, most notable type of serial killers, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who killed people from 1978 to 95, another long-term mass murder guy. He was a registered Democrat, a neo-Luddite, and an eco-terrorist. By no stretch of the imagination was this man a right-winger. So, again, out of these, dozen names, I got one Republican, I got 3 Democrats, and the rest we don't know. Again, it's not quite as obvious, but there's an obvious leaning here. It still doesn't go in the favor of the left wing. And on the next part, we'll get into the mass murders. This is where the Democrats really shine. See ya.